Good morning, and welcome to this webinar on reducing your reliance on fats and oils. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us, and hopefully we can provide you with an interesting perspective and give you some potential solutions on what is, I'm sure, a challenge for many of you watching. My name is Rob Lambert, and I head up Marketing Communications here at Ulrick & Short, and I'll be hosting you for the duration of the webinar. With me on this webinar is one of our development technologists, Steph Kearney.
Hi, everyone.
And also one of our technical field support technologists, Alex Batty.
Hi, everyone.
So the format of this webinar is we're all going to tackle a key topic. So first off, I'll look at the reason behind the price hikes, why this is happening, and the current state of the market. Then I'll pass you over to Alex. We'll talk about the functionality of fat and why it's so difficult to replace fats and oils from a technical perspective. Then Steph will guide you through some worked examples so you can see how you can reduce your reliance on fats practically in a few different applications. So we're going to try and make this webinar as interactive as possible. We'll put up a poll in a few minutes, as well as having some QR codes on some select slides for some recipes and guides which you may want to scan and download, and they may be of use to you. So you may want to have your phones at the ready so you can do this. If you do have any questions or any follow-up in the webinar, that you can get in touch with us in a few different ways. So if you're an existing customer of ours, please feel free to contact your account manager with any questions. Alternatively, you can pop a question into the Q&A function below, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible following the webinar. And also at the end, there'll be some contact details at the end of the webinar, so you can contact Steph and Alex direct, or there'll be a more general inquiries at email address as well. Also, following the webinar, you'll be receiving a recording. So if you miss anything, don't worry, you will get a recording afterwards. So what I want to do to start with is actually I want to turn this on its head slightly, and I want to throw the question back out to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a poll. This is a completely anonymous poll, so please feel free to be as honest as you want. And what I want to know is, what do you think the best strategy is for addressing price volatilities and price hikes? Are you looking at product reformulation in terms of cost engineering? Are you looking at sourcing alternative suppliers to get a more competitive price? Or are you currently not doing anything and waiting it out and waiting for the prices to fall to a more normal level, or a pre-2022 level? Or are you doing something else? If you're doing something else, please feel free to leave it in the comments. Okay, thank you all very much. Getting some really good engagement here. I'll just leave this on for a couple more seconds, and I'll just end that and quickly share these results. Thank you all for voting, by the way. So I'll just quickly share these. So, I mean, obviously, so we have some differences in strategies here. Obviously, most of you guys have favored product reformulation. So what we're going to do is, throughout the webinar, and Alex and Steph in particular, they'll explore this a bit more and go into see how we can potentially help with that product reformulation process. So let's delve into this a bit more. So first off, let's look at dairy fats. Let's address dairy fats first. So there's two main reasons why dairy fats have increased in price. The first reason, and the main reason, is higher input costs. And here we were talking about fuel, energy, and fertilizer. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine is adding very significantly to milk production costs. Both countries were leading exporters of fertilizers, of nitrogen-based fertilizers more specifically, and of wheat, which is obviously an important feed for cattle. So this single issue alone is accounting for between 70 to 80% of price rises within the dairy sector. Additionally, overall fuel and energy inflation, so depending where you are, this could be anywhere between a third and up to 100%, have also contributed to price hikes. Of course, this isn't exclusive to dairy fats, but they are also contributing factors, and disproportionately so. So food inflation at the moment is 13.1% in the UK, which is over 3% higher than overall UK inflation, which is hovering around 10%. The second reason for this is a decline in supply, a small but significant decline in supply. So in volume terms, the forecast for 2022 of EU milk production is down nearly 840 million litres on 2021 levels. And to put this into a bit of perspective, that's around 1.2%. Additionally, Australia and New Zealand, who are responsible for about 35% of milk exports, global milk exports, are down 2.4% and 0.7% respectively, again on 2021 levels. So a small but significant decline which has contributed to price hikes. And as you can see here, the gains are really quite staggering. So this graph shows UK wholesale dairy prices, and it tracks cream, butter, and skimmed milk powder prices. If we take cream and butter, there's been increases of nearly 90% over a 12-month period, and skimmed milk powder up by over 50% in the same period as well. And this is the most up-to-date data as of August 2022. Retail prices are less impacted. They're not up by quite as much as suppliers and manufacturers have absorbed some of the costs, but they're still up by anywhere between 28 to 35% if you look at low-fat milk, whole milk, and butter. So let's move on to oils now. So the story with oils is again overwhelmingly one of supply, and it's an even more direct knock-on effect from the Ukraine and Russia situation. But firstly, let's explore a bit of context. So the four big oils which are used in a food production capacity are palm oil, soybean oil, rapeseed oil, and sunflower oil. And the chances are, if you're watching, to a greater or lesser extent, you'll interact with these and have these in your product formulations. The graph, the table that we see here shows non-captive global production, which basically means this is oil production which is used and exported. So it doesn't track domestic oil production if it's produced and used in the same country, but this is the most accurate data we can get. As you can see, palm, soybean, rapeseed, and sunflower are the four big ones. And with the oil market, the important point here is that oil markets are incredibly interconnected, and all of them have knock-on impacts of one another. Even if we're talking about crude oil and petroleum prices, these also impact the price of these. So some of you may be thinking that actually the price of oils has dropped significantly in the last 2 to 3 months after a big jump at the start of the year. So what I first want to do is address this and address why prices are so volatile. So the short-term drop in cost is for a number of different reasons. First off, Indonesia. So Indonesia is the leading producer of palm oil. Following the Russia-Ukraine conflict with a crisis in sunflower oil production, Indonesia placed an export ban on all palm oil to reduce costs domestically. This has now been lifted in the last few weeks, so there's been a greater supply of palm oil globally, and this has cooled down the market somewhat, and not just affected palm oil prices, but overall oil prices. Secondly, there are fears of a recession in China, and as one of the world's largest consumers of oil, the economy has taken a downturn, and there's a projected reduction in demand. Which again has cooled the market down slightly. Thirdly, obviously rapeseed and sunflower oil are slightly more interchangeable functionality-wise. Obviously at the start of the year, there was a very, very significant hit because of the Ukraine-Russia situation, which account for about 60% of sunflower oil production with Ukraine and Russia alone. And there's been a slight recovery in this in terms of alternative supplies. Although it's to be noted, this is by no means the same level of supply as previously, as sort of 2021 levels. And the final reason is biodiesel. So rapeseed oil was also going up because of its use in biodiesel in the EU. But again, recession fears and the drop in petroleum crude oil price has again cooled the market slightly and brought prices down. And as a result, for the moment, the market seems to have bottomed out slightly. although there is significant concern that the weather in Europe is damaging crops, and going into winter, petroleum prices will rise again, and this will edge prices back up. So the point here is that there's never been so much volatility in the market, and these short-term dips are not indicative of long-term reduction in costs. So what we've done for this is we focused in specifically on sunflower oil, because this is the most severely impacted case study over the last few months. So as we said before, Ukraine and Russia are solely responsible for nearly 60% of global sunflower oil production. If we take the Black Sea territory as a whole, that goes up to nearly 75%. Of course, there's been significant impact on supply chain and significant disruption on supply chains in current months. The global response to this has further compounded the situation. So we mentioned Indonesia earlier on, China as well have already started to limit oil exports and embark on sort of more protectionist policies to protect their domestic markets. This has reduced availability and supply even more and compounded the situation even further. So I think what we want to say here is that the situation with dairy fats and the situation with oils is not a short-term situation. The harvests have been significantly impacted in Ukraine and in Russia for 2022. They will be for 2023. So we're looking at this situation to go through for at least 18 to 24 months, probably beyond. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass you over to Alex, who can speak to you about some of the technical details of fat replacements.
Thanks, Rob. So let's have a look at what fat is. So some of you may know fat as being that food you feel guilty about, or the thing that makes food delicious and moreish. But actually, as humans, we cannot live or survive without it. So fats can be solid or liquid, and you may know them as being items such as butter, oil, lard, and cream. So we consume fat in our diets, and a small amount of fat is an essential part of a healthy, balanced diet. Fats have many uses in the body, from being a source of essential fatty acids like omega-3, helping us to absorb vitamins A, D, and E, as the body can't do this without fat, keep us warm, and for providing energy. So we get 9 calories per gram of fat. Too much fat in our diet ultimately ends up as body fat and can increase the risk of diseases. So the main types of fat found in food are saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and trans fat. So saturated fat and trans fat are fats which may be perceived as unhealthy or bad fats, as they raise the bad cholesterol in our blood. And we think of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats as healthy fats, as they help to maintain healthy cholesterol levels. So processed meats, cheddar, milk, cream, and coconut oil are examples of saturated fat. Takeaway food, biscuits, cakes, and pies are some examples of trans fat. Peanut butter, avocados, olive oil, and rapeseed oil are examples of monounsaturated fats. Oily fish like mackerel and salmon, walnuts, and sunflower seeds are just some examples of polyunsaturated fats. So they supply omega-3 and omega-6 to our bodies, which we can't make on our own. So fats and oils are triglycerides, which are made up of 3 fatty acids and glycerol, which is a form of glucose. This here is essentially a fat or an oil, so it's a triglyceride. What determines the difference between fats is the makeup of the fatty acid groups on the chain. So their chain length, so the number of carbon, and the number of double bonds. So there are 2 main types of fatty acid. So you can get a saturated and an unsaturated fatty acid. A saturated fatty acid has no double bonds, and the carbon atoms are saturated with hydrogen. As there are no double bonds, the fatty acids are straight and can stack and create a strong network with a strong structure. So fats that contain a lot of saturated fatty acids are usually solid at room temperature and have a high melting temperature. An unsaturated fatty acid has a double bond in its chain, which means the carbon atoms are not saturated with hydrogen. The double bond creates a bend in the chain which prohibits a strong structure to be formed, and therefore the structure is easily broken. Fats that contain a lot of unsaturated fatty acids are usually liquid at room temperature and have a lower melting temperature. So fatty acids with one double bond are monounsaturated, and fatty acids with more than one double bond are polyunsaturated. Trans fats are unsaturated fatty acids, which are usually produced through a process called hydrogenation, which ultimately stabilizes the fat. So this almost mimics a saturated fatty acid, as trans fats are usually solid at room temperature, but they do have a double bond. So most fats and oils contain both saturated and unsaturated fats in different proportions. The function of fat varies depending on the requirements and desired qualities of the finished product. Fats can make food more desirable by enhancing its structure and texture, improving mouthfeel, appearance, and by carrying flavours. So fats have some great uses in food, so let's look at some of them. So structure and texture. Fats contribute a lot to the structure and texture of foods. As an example, let's look at what fat does in short crust pastry. So a fat which is solid at room temperature can be called a shortening. This gives food a crumbly and crispy texture. Fats which are used for shortening could be vegetable oils, lard, and butter. The fat reduces the development of gluten, resulting in the gluten breaking down into shorter strands, creating a crumbly texture, hence the name shortening. The fat coats the flour, preventing it from absorbing water and reducing the formation of gluten. Shortening is used in many baked products to give the product its desired texture. Too much gluten in a product like short crust pastry would result in it being elastic and stretchy, not short and crumbly. So then within puff pastry, fat is folded in. It results in the baked product being flaky in texture as it separates the dough into layers. The fats help separate the layers of gluten and starch formed in the dough. So during the baking process, the fat melts, which leaves little air pockets, while the liquid produces steam, which evaporates and causes the layers to rise. The texture you get from spreads and spreading is also achieved through fats. So because solid fats do not melt immediately, but soften over a range of temperatures, the fats and fatty acids can be arranged to alter their melting points, so consumers are able to spread them straight from the fridge. The use of fat in food also helps with shelf life. So fats help retain moisture, which ultimately increases its shelf life as it keeps the texture of the product moist. The fat bonds with the starch granules, so they are unable to bond with one another, which interferes with the process of retrogradation. So this reduces the rate at which the product becomes dry, hard, and stale, and undesirable for the consumer. So mouthfeel. So the mouthfeel of foods can be a critical attribute for a food product, as it hugely affects consumer perception and choice. So the mouthfeel of a food plays a vital role in the way we experience and taste the joy of foods. Fats provide a creamy, smooth, melt in the mouthfeel, which is difficult to replace. The physical sensation in the mouth comes from feeling the texture and structure of the food. For example, you can get chewy, crumbly, and flaky. So this directly links with the function fat has with structure and texture, as it gives the desired texture of the product you're going to put in your mouth. For example, if you were to eat a cake, you would want and expect a tender, moist, and soft mouthfeel. The melting point of certain foods can all have an effect on mouthfeel. For example, foods like chocolate, custard, and peanut butter all melt at body temperature. This gives food that melt in your mouth feel, which feels indulgent and luxury, whilst creating a smooth coating sensation. Emulsification is also a large contributor to the mouthfeel of certain foods. For example, it is what gives that indulgent, smooth, luxury texture to mayonnaise. An emulsion is generally a mixture of oil and water. Fats like oil are insoluble in water, so an emulsifier is needed to make an emulsion. When the two liquids are emulsified, it can create a creamy and smooth mouthfeel. Foods like chocolate and cream are also made from emulsification, which gives them their silky, soft mouthfeel. and flavour and colour. So we all know how delicious fat can be and how much our bodies crave it sometimes. So fats have the ability to absorb and preserve flavours. They help us enjoy the flavour of foods as they dissolve and concentrate flavours and aromas. So a good example of this is when you're cooking bacon. You almost feel like you can taste it before you even eat it. So this is because the fat has dissolved and the flavour is released into the air when cooking. Fat's also really good at picking up flavours from other ingredients in food and carrying and releasing them throughout. So a lot of spices and herbs are fat soluble, which is why we tend to cook them off in oil at the beginning of the cooking process. Fat also coats your tongue, which allows the flavour in the fat to linger and to stay around for longer for you to taste. In terms of colour, the type of fat used in the product will also impact the colour. A fat like margarine will give the baked product more of a golden colour, whilst a fat like lard will give more of a pale yellow colour. They can also be used for glazing and they can give a glossy appearance to food. So let's have a look at the replacements for fat. So the main ingredient we have to replace fat comes from the crop tapioca. So tapioca is a staple crop of South America and is grown in regions around the equator. It is a dietary staple in several countries where it serves as their source of carbohydrate. Underneath the microscope, tapioca will look like a very round and spherical granule, like you can see in this picture here. It's very smooth in texture. In a starch gel, tapioca has a very long and stringy texture, and it's very clear. The use of tapioca adds indulgence to products by providing a creamy and smooth mouthfeel, whilst visually giving a glossy appearance and smooth texture. Tapioca has a bland flavour profile, which means it gives a very clean flavour and does not mask any other flavours in your product. Tapioca is widely used in the food industry for fat replacement solutions. It is suitable for use across all food sectors, including bakery, dairy, sauces, and ready meals. So what does this all mean to you, and how can we help you? So design and develop. We work with you very closely to design and develop new formulations and recipes to enable you to replace an ingredient whilst ensuring product quality and desirable attributes. Clean label processing. All of the solutions we have to offer for replacing fat are clean label. This means all our ingredients have a clean and consumer-friendly back-of-pack declaration. And technical expertise. So at Ulrick and Shaw, everything we do revolves around technical support and expertise. Including myself, we have a team of field support all around the country with technical expertise in all sectors of the food industry. We are able to help you at any stage of your development, whether this is at kitchen concept stage or all the way through to factory trials and production. We are here to help find you a solution and help you get the very best out of our ingredients. So I'm now going to pass you on to Steph, who is going to talk you through some solutions we have for fat replacement. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. In the upcoming section, I'll be speaking through 3 application areas where fat is predominantly used and the solutions we've developed in order to replace these successfully whilst maintaining overall product quality. On the bottom right-hand side of the slide, there'll be a QR code, which you can scan to download the recipes. Also, on the recipe sheets, you'll have the nutritional traffic lights of both a controlled and a fat-reduced version, so you can clearly see the differences side by side. Firstly, we'll look at the replacement of fat in cakes and muffins. So the function of fat in cakes is more complex than you think. In the creaming method, the fat is beaten with the sugar until it becomes light, fluffy, and pale in colour. The water in oil emulsion changes to an oil and water emulsion. During this process, the air is incorporated into the batter and the volume increases. The air in the batter is important as it forms nuclei or sites into which other gases, water vapour from the moisture, and carbon dioxide from the baking powder migrate and expand on heating. It is important that the batter is stable enough to retain these gases and produce a cake with a light texture. The solid profile and crystal size of the fat have a major influence on aeration performance. The performance of butter will depend on its solid profile and its crystalline structure. The creaming process involves a dynamic balance of fat, sugar, and water. So firstly, we look at the textual analysis. So reducing fat in cake and muffin applications can reduce the overall cake quality. Fats act as tenderizers by coating the structure builders and preventing them from hydrating and forming extended structures. Therefore, the removal of fat should result in a firmer product, but however, the addition of the lye produces a product comparable to the control, which can be seen in the graph. So next we look at the height analysis. So as previously discussed, when fat is creamed with sugar, it supports the incorporation of air, which helps to leaven goods. In addition, sources of fat also contain water, which aids leveling as it evaporates during the baking process. It has been proven by reducing the fat by 30% with the light and water, the overall volume increases, providing a more desirable peak on the surface. So next, the solution. So during the development of an alternative, it was critical to ensure fat viscosity, moisture retention, and product quality all remain similar to that of the fat counterpart. With this in mind, we now have a solution under the name Delight 5, declared as a tapioca starch. Delight 5 can be used to replace both solid fat, so butter for example, and liquid fats such as oils. Delight 5 has been developed to mimic the functionality of fat in baked goods. For example, the volume, so the overall rise, the texture, so the softness, the color, and the flavor. The next application area I'm going to speak about is frostings. So icings and frostings are terms conventionally applied to a wide variety of spreadable, semi-solid confectionery products that are used as toppings to sweeten or decorate baked products. Cream or buttercream frostings and icings usually comprise high levels of fat. Fat and frostings exhibit a rich and creamy mouthfeel due to the high levels of shortening implied. The fats and shortenings commonly used in icing includes butter and margarine. So the solution. So during the development of an alternative for fat and frostings, it was critical to ensure that the functionalities of both vegetable fat and dairy fat were replicated. As a result, we now have a solution under the name Delight 6, which is declared as a tapioca starch. It can replace your desired amount of fat with Delight and water. I've spoken you through the replacement of fat in frostings using Delight 6, but it's also worth noting that Delight 6 can lend itself exceptionally well to fat reduction in other products, including chocolate ganache, caramel, and cookies. The final category I'm going to speak you through is sauces. So we now have a range of starch-based solutions centered on tapioca for both hot and cold sauces. This tapioca solution will provide a smooth and creamy mouthfeel, glossy appearance, and clean flavor profile since the granule shape is spherical and therefore more mouth coating. Due to the clean processing they have gone through, they are able to withstand high shear processing, low pH conditions down to 3.5, and high temperature conditions. So the solution. So during the development of an alternative for cream, butter, or oil and sauces, it was critical to ensure that the functionalities of fat were replicated. As a result, we now have a solution under the name Delight 9 for hot sauces and Delight 12 for cold sauces, which are both declared as a tapioca starch. They can replace up to 40% of cream, butter, or oil with Delight and water. So some of the benefits of the Delight products that I've spoken you through include its clean label declaration, no flavor masking, and it provides a smooth, indulgent mouthfeel and body. Finally, they improve the nutritional label by reducing the overall fat and calorie content. All of the products I've spoken to you about today are all tapioca based. This is because tapioca is a very spherical granule, which gives a very indulgent mouthfeel and it can improve the overall eating experience. Thank you for listening, and I will now pass you back to Rob to finish up.
Thank you, Steph, and also thank you, Alex, as well. And this concludes this short webinar. We hope it's been informative and given you some interesting ideas and potential solutions. I see some of you have already put some questions in the Q&A function. We will get back to you as soon as possible following this webinar. But if you do have any more questions on the concepts or the ingredients, or you're just looking for general support or advice, please feel free to pop more questions in the Q&A function. We'll leave this webinar open for a few minutes, but also feel free to get in touch on the below, either on our more standard inquiries inbox, or you can contact Steph and Alex directly there. Let's say, alternatively, if you're a customer, please feel free to get in touch with your account manager as well. So the last thing to say is thank you very much for your time, and we hope to see you all again at our next webinar. Thank you very much. Goodbye.